Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, as always in these videos, I'm trying to reach out to people who are struggling with cluster B or cluster B adjacent issues. And I hope these videos are understood that this is just me thinking, and I revise my thoughts all the time. And it's sort of like an updated rough draft of, what may be happening with us or things that we may experiment with to, maybe try to gain even a small amount of improvement. I don't have any illusion that you can just completely change a personality. I don't have any illusion that, if you have a real weakness in your mental functioning, that you can just make that disappear completely, or that you can have, like a flash transformational recovery, like miraculous. I think everything in steps. I think we do have to get used to maybe evolving and maybe improving in small increments. And that does bring up a really important thing, which is that if we're only improving in small increments while we're making small improvements, okay, if we have a tendency to get into trouble, or if we have a tendency to maybe put our job at risk or our relationships at risk while we're making these tiny little improvements, until we get to like a substantial place of, substantial improvement, where even then we still have the normal life risks. But in that meantime, where we're making those small improvements, we're still really at risk for, potentially losing a job, potentially losing a relationship. And that's exactly why I think in the future, okay, I think people will have either a coach or a sponsor or a co-sponsor, so that if they take the recovery seriously, okay, they can have a sort of a network of people to sort of catch them maybe when they really need some insight. Or if they make a big mistake, they can maybe have a resource of like peer accountability where they could quickly get support for like dealing with maybe a mess that they made, or whatever. So, you know, basically I'm just being realistic. I think that, recovery in these with these kind of disorders is probably very incremental, very, very small scale. And if we're only going to be improving in small bits, what kind of support network do we put in place to sort of prevent, we're inevitably going to screw things up. We're inevitably going to have issues. So, I think we all have to think, on the one hand, try to recover. And on the other hand, while we are recovering, what are we going to put into place as like a support network to sort of protect ourselves when we inevitably fuck up, or things happen. Anyway, so I just want to be very realistic that I'm not proposing ever, okay, like a radical, dramatic, miraculous, transformational, like extreme changes or extreme improvements. I'd like to sit in a world of very cold realism, but hopeful, but realistic, um, that there is a lot of promise, and I very much believe in recovery. Okay, but I think that I do come from a place where the things I propose are very much in rough draft form, just ideas as they evolve. In my case, and that each one of us is going to have to experiment on their own. And I hope to provide experience that I've had, maybe to inspire people, or to just give them just some resource, some ideas as they experiment in their own lives, even to the point where they may completely disagree with me, but just having the conversation alive. And definitely coming from a place where I'm not coming from a place where I have any expectation, or that I'm suggesting to anyone that they could have an expectation of dramatic, radical, instantaneous, miraculous recovery. And that as long as we're talking about recovery, knowing that recovery is very slow, that all of us may want to think about what kind of peer support or community resources we might want to have in place to sort of keep us in check, basically, while we're going through this recovery. And also not to let recovery become sort of like a way of disengaging from the real world, because I think anything, if anything, I propose the opposite, which is that recovery be a reintegration and a reinforcement of integration, and an improvement of our integration with the real world, not the therapy world, not the mental health world. I don't think we need to even come close to thinking that mental health is kind of like a carve out from the real world. Like I have the real world and then I have my mental health activities. I think really it has to be very, very integrated, Anyway, but I say that all as kind of like an introduction to this video. That everything that I say here is really, really rough draft, and I'm just bouncing ideas as they develop for me, and hoping that it may be useful to other people who are also struggling, with cluster B related issues. Anyway, that's just kind of my intro here. But what I wanted to talk about here, basically in this video, sorry for that long introduction, but basically, I very much am coming to believe that the concept of dialectics and philosophy, I don't know how dialectics is defined in psychology. I'll admit that. I don't really have, and I don't think they've been too open about it either. I don't think it's very, very clear, like in the way they expose themselves to the public. I know if you read the fine print, but there's nothing obvious in the way that you hear the word dialectics coming out of psychology that has me understand it to be the same as what I understand in philosophy. But basically, the way I understand dialectics is as a concept coming out of, like, say, the late 18th, early 19th century. Basically, dialectics is sort of like the process in history whereby competing ideas are sort of synthesized through the operation of history, through the progress of history. Okay. And I'm not going to say that Hegel, or like say Marx and Hegel, those are, kind of classic, those are like the superstars of the dialectical, people who talked about dialectics at that time when it was fashionable. But I'm not going to say that Hegel did not believe there was dialectics that take place inside a person. I think he just focused on the historical dialectic. But I still take their emphasis as being important. That in their understanding of dialectics, they really emphasized how the progress of history is how competing ideas get processed in the world. Okay. And I'm just suggesting that, it's a very useful concept. And I think that it's a concept, I can't think of a better word or a better concept to apply to what may go on inside an individual, that we may internally also have a dialectical process whereby irreconcilable competing ideas just kind of sit and get processed internally through a kind of an organic synthesis, sort of an organic metabolic process. Okay. And I'm just proposing that it seems to me, and again, I'm just rough drafting this, that's what these videos are about, but I'm just concerned and I'm concerned and I'm suspicious that there may be sort of a metabolic circuit inside of ourselves whereby the more we load ourselves up to let's say a therapeutic level, not excessively, but up to a therapeutic level, the more we sort of load ourselves and let ourselves be loaded and laden with sort of competing dissonant ideas, considerations, issues and considerations in the environment, and let ourselves sort of be loaded by those things. When we don't quickly dispose of those issues and just let the table be loaded with competing dissonant issues, that sort of like the weight on us in the, kind of that dysthymic weight, being weighed down by these things to a therapeutic level, not excessive, that kind of like burden will sort of activate, I guess, or lead itself to sort of like a metabolization of those irreconcilables, okay, which is not an orchestrated way of thinking. And that when we orchestrate our thinking around those things, we're just kind of trying to dispose and clear the table so we don't have that burden, okay. And I'm suggesting that when we let ourselves have the burden of all these competing environmental considerations, that may sort of activate or sort of increase a sort of metabolic process whereby we just kind of organically synthesize all this subject matter without orchestration. Okay. And that if we have that kind of as a baseline sort of in the background of all of our living, that may activate a kind of a baseline, very, very slight dysthymia, but actually a very therapeutic dysthymia. Okay. And again, I emphasize very slight, not extreme, but, just being loaded. It's kind of a moderate dysthymia that may in fact not only be therapeutic, but it may also, and not only like it may also, well, let's say therapeutic in the sense that it may help stabilize our moods. It may help stabilize our arousal patterns. Okay, so that we don't try to seek as a home level kind of like a too pleasant arousal pattern where we're kind of home based, sort of in a kind of a burdened, slightly dysthymic level, not too much, but knowing that burden sort of opens up this sort of like sort of organic metabolization, okay, which has all these side effects of sort of regulating our moods, and also because we're processing all this environmental content, we're sort of dissolving our internal into the environment, and our environment is coming in and dissolving the internal self. So sort of like the sort of like the curtain between me as a person and my environment is sort of dissolving, and we're sort of like projecting into the environment, and the environment is sort of coming into us, and so that may have sort of a natural ego dissolving property, not completely. Everything in percentages. I mean, like, if the ego is like a big thing, it may just have a dissolving component, where it sort of comes in and has some degree of, having the ego kind of go out into the environment, and the environment sort of comes in and sort of blends in with the ego. So it's sort of like opening a window. When you open a window, the air from the outside starts to come in and mix with the air on the inside, and the air on the inside does start to go out to the outside. So it's sort of like, as you open the window, sort of like the distinction between inside and outside starts to get mixed a little bit integrated. So it's sort of like some degree of ego dissolving. And then also that by allowing this organic dialectic, we also start to slowly pixelate into higher resolution, higher fidelity. Okay, basically our overall panoramic reality testing. Okay, because I believe that when the dialectic is very, very low, when we're not having a lot of dialectical processing, I think our reality testing is also very low, very poor, very, very cartoonish, very exaggerated, very polarized. Okay, so basically, I think that allowing this internal dialectical metabolic process sort of takes care of a lot of mood regulation, takes care of a lot of reality testing issues, and also kind of dissolves the ego. So that's taking care of a lot of personality disorder symptoms in one operation. Okay, so I really, again, if I'm wrong on this, I'm just saying this is where I'm at right now, and I'm experimenting with it, and I have been. But I certainly encourage people to, respond to this, or to see how it applies in their lives, because maybe in the end, maybe this is all full of shit, but I think it's a very powerful concept, the idea of internal dialectical processing. And I think it's almost undoubtable that, that I think a lot of human beings do have some degree of internal dialectical processing. Probably, if I were to guess, probably most people are chronically low in dialectical processing. But I'm just thinking that, for people that have actually personality disorders, cluster B disorders, or like ADD or addictions, I think it's probably extremely low, the dialectical processing. And probably what we're doing instead of dialectical processing is probably we're orchestrating our processing. In other words, when we get loaded down with a lot of issues, we're intellectually sort of disposing and processing things without letting it weigh on us, so that we don't have that sort of like baseline dysthymia, and also so that we don't get that unorchestrated organic processing, which takes place without orchestration. Okay, so I'm not saying that people with personality disorders don't reconcile issues. I'm just saying they reconcile them without them weighing on us, and without allowing an organic, unorchestrated process to take place. Sort of it's another organic process that I think is sort of like taking away the liver and the kidney of our mind, and just relying on just the mind, just the brain itself to process without letting the kidney and the liver just do its job. You know what I mean? To provide maybe a richer integration of environmental content. Okay. So basically, if you want, we could use maybe, I mean, for today, it's like the rough draft of today, but I'm thinking that maybe an applicable metaphor and an apt metaphor, I believe, might be soil quality. It's like soil quality. You know, if we on the inside are like a flower pot, or like a portion of soil, just like in the garden, the garden will perform differently. The garden will have different results depending on what kind of fertilization procedure we're using. Okay, you can just go and buy the nitrogen and just the basic, just the basic like industrial fertilizer elements, and you can have a very like or inorganic fertilization of your garden. But you can also bring in just like lots of like vegetable waste, or like wood chips, or like parts of like rotting tree trunks, and maybe mosses, and like fallen leaves, and you know what I'm saying. You can add like all kinds of natural products to your garden, which will naturally produce over a long period of time a sort of a compost, and that compost will really enrich in the soil. And most of what we put into compost are really just waste products. They're not like industrial products. They're like just waste products, like with leaves. Leaves, just fallen leaves, they turn brown and they slowly decompose, and they create an environment for a lot of very special fungus to come in. And you can also mix in your green waste, from vegetables, and like wood chips, or just even parts of like a rotten tree trunk or whatever, mosses, just biological waste, basically. And so the garden has a way of taking waste and slowly metabolizing it very, very slowly into a kind of a true soil. And the true soil is not dirt. The true soil is really a very metabolic, very complex, very slow developing, slow evolving, sort of like a ecosystem almost. And it just the more garbage you put in there. I mean, it depends on how you blend it, but you could say roughly you put a lot of garbage in the garden, and it has a way of kind of transforming into richness. So I'm thinking that that's kind of like a good analogy for what's happening potentially with our internal dialectic, which is that if we open ourselves, let's say, to the, I'm going to say almost the garbage around us, the environmental, I would say all the like dissonant environmental considerations that are all around us, with our relationships, our family, our job, career, community. Even if we don't give a shit about our community, we're still it's still around us. You know what I mean? And so even if I don't personally give a shit about my community, it's still part of my environment. You know what I mean? So almost like the more I don't give a shit about it, the more important it becomes, because that just means that if I do sort of, let myself sort of be weighed down a little more by the community issues, the issues in my community, even though I'm not necessarily going to do anything about it, but just let myself allow the concern to sort of, not to have a special feeling about it, but just to allow myself to be weighed by the considerations that are in the environment, that slowly, I'm sort of taking on things that are obviously not comfortable. So I'm adding discomfort to my life. I'm adding burden. I'm becoming more burdened, more of a pain in the ass. Okay. But if I just let it sit, like I throw leaves in the garden, I throw wood chips or pieces of, rotten tree trunks in my garden, just let it sit. Don't orchestrate it. Just let it be there. Let it decompose naturally. Let it metabolize in the garden ecosystem. You know what I'm saying? So the same thing could be here, precisely not to orchestrate these ideas, not to do anything, not to be an activist, but just to let issues just sit more on the table of the soul, so to speak. Okay. And that will sort of weigh us down. It'll sort of change our baseline sort of like it'll create sort of a baseline dysthymia. Hopefully not too much, just I would say hopefully just therapeutic, but basically create sort of a baseline dysthymia and kind of allow these elements to sort of decompose and integrate, kind of like the metabolism of compost in the garden. You know what I mean? And I think it might even be interesting, maybe as a therapy, they talk about art therapy, they talk about music therapy. What about garden therapy? Maybe we could experiment, people with cluster B, with developing compost in our gardens, having gardens, developing compost. And for those of us who live in apartments, we could create like tubs, tubs of soil, where we could have, like, say, very large tubs, which are kind of like gigantic flower pots, but gigantic, where we could actually have our garden like in tubs, like somewhere either in our apartment or on our porch or whatever. But the idea that we could sort of be feeding our garden with different compost elements, so that in a way we have a tangible analogy or a metaphor for what we're doing on the inside, which is we're allowing more sort of garbage, let's say waste products, allowing, irritating issues in our environmental content, to sort of just come and sit on our table and sort of feel the burden and actually feel it in our bodies. I think it's important, if this is really going to work, it wouldn't be a good symptom if we just feel the issues just in our head. We have to feel it in the body. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use the word emotion, because as soon as you say emotion, you kill the spell, you kill the magic. Don't say emotion, because just let your body feel uncomfortable. That's emotional enough. We don't have to then examine what kind of emotions. It's just, as long as you can get to the point where you actually feel it in your body, then you know that it's not just an intellectual process. We're now starting to integrate the body. And I will admit, I spent many years not really feeling anything in my body. I don't know why, maybe, or, who knows? I don't know if that's cluster B or whatever, but I'm just saying, if we're going to actually let environmental content come into the garden of ourselves, I think it's a good sign when you can actually feel the burden in your body and not do anything about it. Just let it be, and let organic process take care of it. No orchestration. You know what I mean? I think it's very important. And I think that, we could have at the same time, like our garden with our composting experiments or whatever. And it's sort of like a nice reinforcement of what we're doing on the inside, And my hope is that, the more we allow, diverse environmental content to sort of come into us and weigh us down and let ourselves metabolize that, the more broader, diverse sort of portfolio of like environmental garbage that we're allowing to sort of sit and sort of weigh on us without us deliberating and orchestrating. I'm hoping that it will be analogous to the garden, where we'll sort of enrichen the soil of ourselves and have ourselves sort of be blended more into the environment, ego dissolving. And I'm thinking that the richer the soil, the more sort of balanced our moods, the more resilient we'll become more resilient to the things that typically throw us off as cluster B, like criticism, like antagonism. What if somebody doesn't like me? Those are things that really affect us. What if somebody is just unreasonably hostile? What if somebody just kind of just makes it clear that they don't want you in their life and you're just a piece of garbage? I mean, the typical things that will set us off, trouble with job, trouble with a client, trouble with my business, trouble with a relationship. Those are things that really affect us. I'm suggesting they'll still affect us, but the better the soil quality, the better we get the soil quality inside ourselves, the more integrated we are into the environment. I'm hoping that we can still suffer. We will suffer the storms of life. We'll still suffer the dramas, the chapters, of our lives. But the idea is that we will have more resilience and have a more integrated way of responding to those things. So anyway, just want to leave you guys with that idea of the garden metaphor and the soil metaphor, and the importance of the organic dialectic as an internal, non-orchestrated, organic process. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.